All right, so we got a brand new video today. In this video, I'm going over two fragrances that were actually sent to me from Joma Shop. So definitely shouts out to Joma Shop for sending me these two fragrances for review. These were sent to me for free, but obviously my opinions on both of these fragrances are my own. And the two fragrances are actually from Maison Asrar. So from what I understand, these are like exclusive to Joma Shop. And then the two fragrances that we have here are, I believe it's called Muharib from Maison Asrar, or Muharib. And then you have Faris Al Arab. All right. So the Faris Al Arab, this one is their take on Blonde Amber from Clive Christian. And then the Muharib, this one is their take on Xerjoff's Naxos. All right. So really, I would say two popular sort of scent profiles, definitely scent profiles that are, I would say, definitely for this time of year, especially here in the United States. So they definitely, I would say did a good job releasing these fragrances right now, because these, again, are two sort of like fall and wintertime types of scents. All right. Now, if you're not familiar with the note breakdowns of either Blonde Amber or Naxos, I'm going to go ahead and go over that in just a second. But I'm going to first start off with the presentation that you get on both of these. So they're essentially the same, just one has kind of like I would say like a silver, and this is almost kind of like a blue greenish sort of colored box, and then this one is basically, it's like a gold and brown colored box. But you can see they look exactly the same, just other than the actual color scheme on them. And you've got the name of the fragrance basically down here in like the lower left hand corner. This is an Eau de Parfum 100 ml bottle for both of them. Maison Asrar on the top of the box. You don't have anything on the sides. And then on the back, you've got the ingredients as well as the name of the fragrance and the name of the house. And then you've got the authenticity sticker over here. And on the bottom, you have like the production date and the barcode. All right. I'm assuming both of these were probably manufactured during the same time. So actually they're not. So Muharib, this one was actually produced in May of this year. And then for the Faris Al Arab, this one was produced in August of this year. All right. So both of them are gonna have, I'm assuming it's kind of like this like ninja sort of, figure on the front. This basically kind of like keeps the other side here closed, sort of like with a magnet, I guess you could say. And then the bottle kind of sits in there like that. All right. So even though these bottles are very like different looking, I like the way that they look. Like I said, you get this sort of like ninja sort of figure as like the cap. And then I really like the way that this actual bottle feels. It's like this like frosted sort of glass. I think that's glass anyway. It doesn't feel like plastic or anything like that. But yeah, it just kind of feels like this really sort of like frosted glass. And you can even see that in the look of it as well. And then you've got the name of the fragrance, as well as Maison Asrar 100 ml Eau de Parfum sticker down here at the bottom. And then the cap is not like heavy or anything like that. You could definitely feel that this, I don't know what the material exactly is, at least on the outside, but definitely on the inside, this is like plastic for sure. And then the sprayer on these are actually very good. So it shoots out a lot of juice for sure. All right. So really good sprayer on these. And just to kind of go over the notes here, for the notes for Blonde Amber, The blonde amber in the top notes, you're gonna get top notes of rum, olibanum, bitter orange, cardamom, pink pepper, ginger, bergamot, and grapefruit. In the mid, you get dried fruits, white tobacco, sandalwood, saffron, tuberose, osmanthus, orris, and jasmine. And then in the base, you get tonka bean, vanilla, myrrh, labdanum, patchouli, cedar, musk, and vetiver. Now for Naxos in the top notes, you get lavender, bergamot, and lemon. In the mid, you get honey, cinnamon, cashmere, and jasmine, sambac. And then in the base notes, you get tobacco leaf, vanilla, and tonka bean. Now, in comparison to the originals, the inspired fragrances. So Muharib compared to, I believe, Blonde Amber, or no. So this one is actually, the Muharib is the Naxos one. That's right. So Muharib compared to Naxos, it's not that different in terms of the note breakdown. So for the Muharib notes, you get top notes of lavender, lemon, and bergamot, mid notes of cinnamon, honey, and cashmere wood, and then in the base you get jasmine, tobacco, and tonka bean. Now for Faris Al Arab compared to the Blonde Amber, for this one, the note breakdown is, in the top notes you get cashmere wood, vanilla, oriental notes, and cherry liqueur. In the mid you get sugarcane, cedarwood, and amber. And then in the base, you get sandalwood, tonka bean, labdanum, and musk. So definitely, I would say a different sort of note breakdown for sure, as compared to like the Clive Christian Blonde Amber. Now, let's go ahead and start with, I'm going to start with this one, the Muharib, compared to Naxos. So this, when I sprayed this on, comparing it to Naxos, I would say this has so far been like the closest interpretation to Naxos that I've smelled of like any sort of Middle Eastern house. So this is going to be noticeably better than like the Fierte Luna, I believe is what it was, from French Avenue. It's definitely better than that. It's better than, I would say for sure, like the Banadier version that I've smelled. I haven't smelled like the one from Paris Corner, the Vue Elegante. I haven't smelled that one, so I can't say like, how much different that one is from, this or even the original Naxos. But I can say for sure in terms of, kind of capturing like that opening with like the lavender and the bergamot, this does a much better job than any other interpretation that I've smelled, with the exception of Alexandria's 1981X. Now, just in general, I would say 1981X, I prefer this over the original Naxos just in general. But this definitely is not like a one-to-one to Naxos. This is like, it's definitely heavier on like the citrus for sure. The lavender to me is louder in this fragrance, and overall it just has a slightly kind of different feel to it than what Naxos does. And again, that's why I like this one a little bit more than I do Naxos. To me, the 1981X is just a little bit more wearable, I guess you could say. I mean, not to say that Naxos isn't like a wearable scent profile, but it just, to me, the way that Alexandria did that particular scent profile, I just prefer it, in their version. But, again, I think if you're looking for something that is a lot more closer to the original scent profile, then I think Muharib is actually a really good choice. Now, as far as the differences that I noticed between Muharib and Naxos, when you first, sprayed the two on, I would say that's really where you can kind of tell the most difference. And it's definitely, Yeah, the richness of the lavender in, Naxos to me is a little bit more richer, a little bit better in Naxos than what it is in Muharib. To me, it's still like a little bit more kind of toned down, and again, not as sort of rich and as high quality as what it is in Naxos and Muharib. But again, this is miles better than I would say most other Naxos interpretations that I've smelled, for sure. Yeah, I think with Muharib, I could say maybe I get a little bit more cinnamon and tobacco, especially in like the opening. I would say that I get a little bit more of that than what I do like the lavender, bergamot, and honey from Naxos. How much could I really say? I would say it's very like subtle in terms of the differences. So like maybe 5% difference, between those two. But I think overall you could definitely tell that Naxos is the slightly more expensive fragrance, the slightly better blended fragrance. But I think for what you pay for this, I believe each one of these are like $49.99 on Joma Shop. I don't necessarily see Naxos being like that much better than this, to where you would actually need to buy Naxos. So yeah, while I can definitely notice that there is a slight difference in richness, between Naxos and Muharib, I don't think that I don't think that I would be able to recommend Naxos over this, because outside of like that, the initial opening where you get that slightly richer, slightly more prominent bergamot and lavender from Naxos. Outside of that, I would say really this still kind of maintains at least about a 95% closeness for the most part to Naxos. So, you are still getting, like that sweet honey that you get from Naxos, that, slightly kind of like floral, tobacco-y type of feel. Really kind of like, I would say light and aromatic. Whereas, something like 1981X is definitely more like beast mode and heavier for sure. The original Naxos, to me, it wears a little bit more lighter and more aromatic. So this has that same sort of characteristic. Again, I just think in the opening, this is slightly less quality than what the original is. But I mean, really, you could say that only kind of lasts for maybe like the first probably 10-15 minutes or so. And then I would say after that, the two fragrances are extremely close, like at least about probably 95% close to each other. So I'm really actually impressed by Muharib for sure. Like I said, this has definitely so far been my favorite, or I would say probably my closest, Naxos interpretation that I've smelled. Again, definitely my favorite would be the 1981X, but this in terms of accuracy is, the best one that I've smelled so far. Now for the performance on this, the performance is actually pretty decent. I get like around probably 7 hours or so of total longevity with Muharib. So, I would say definitely above average for sure. And, in terms of the projection, this does project, I would say, about the same as what you get with Naxos. So, you're going to get probably around like an arm's length or so of projection for like the first hour and a half. And then, after that, it's going to dial back a little bit more. But this, in my opinion, it's not a weak fragrance at all. So I would say performance-wise, this one is definitely solid. I haven't really had these two fragrances that long. So, I can't really say that this is like a fully maturated bottle or anything like that. And, again, right out of the box, this is definitely performing pretty decently. All right. Now, for the actual closeness rating on this fragrance, like I said, I would overall give Muharib a 95% close to, Xerjoff Naxos. Like I said, this definitely so far has been, the best interpretation that I've smelled so far. So would definitely give it that. And in terms of like overall rating, I would say this one would be like a 8 out of 10 for me. Like I said, I definitely prefer the way that the 1981X is done, as far as the Naxos sort of scent profile goes. So even though this one is not as close, I do still prefer this, but I still do actually like the scent of Naxos, overall. And so, I would say this is the same rating that I would give, Xerjoff Naxos itself would be about an 8 out of 10. So definitely still one that I would, recommend for sure. Again, especially if you are more of a fan of the original sort of scent profile of Naxos. All right. So that's my take on Muharib. Now, as far as the Faris Al Arab goes, the blonde amber interpretation, I would say this fragrance just by itself, like if you're not comparing this to blonde amber, I would say by itself, this is actually a very nice fragrance. It's basically what I get from this is like this very kind of like resinous, ambery, balsamic, slightly kind of like, I would say you do definitely get like a tobacco type of feel from this fragrance. At least I do anyway. A little bit of like smokiness. That's the main thing that I really kind of get from, I guess you could say, the sort of blonde amber scent profile. Now, as far as how this actually compares to blonde amber, I would say there's a noticeable difference, between this and the original blonde amber. Blonde amber to me, especially in the opening through the dry down, or not the opening through the dry down, the opening through the mid, I would say a blonde amber is considerably better than Faris Al Arab. It just smells overall a lot more just smoother. I would say the ingredients definitely smell higher quality for sure, and you could say a little bit more natural. This, from the opening through like through the mid, to me it smells very much kind of like synthetic, and it doesn't have as much sort of like fullness and smoothness that blonde amber does. So I would say really the main things also that I'm get from this is this doesn't seem to be as resinous as what blonde amber is. It seems to be a little bit more, I guess you could say, kind of like on the like tobacco leaning side for sure. So it kind of gives me like a slightly more like dustier type of feeling than what blonde amber does. Blonde amber to me, like I said, it's a little bit more kind of resinous. I guess you could even kind of say like slightly more buttery than what the Faris Al Arab is. And it just overall, I think, is a little bit more warmer and fuller than Faris Al Arab. That definitely starts to change for sure as you start to get from like the mid to the dry down. I do think that this does start to become a lot closer for sure in the dry down of Faris Al Arab. But even in the dry down, compared to blonde amber, to me blonde amber still smells like the more richer, higher quality, better blended fragrance for sure. Now, to be fair, this is way cheaper. Like I would say, this is like just a fraction of the cost of blonde amber. I think the cheapest that I've seen blonde amber go for on like a discounter was what, like around $330, I think, for a full bottle. And then like retail, I think it was something like $580. So like $600. Whereas this Faris Al Arab, this one is $50. So, you know, like less than like a tenth of, you know, the cost of the original fragrance. I would say for sure, like if you're someone that blonde amber is just like completely out of the question for you, in terms of you being able to afford that fragrance, then I do think that this fragrance just by itself will sort of suffice for you for sure. So, you know, if you've never smelled blonde amber before and you just go directly into this fragrance and you appreciate this fragrance for what it is and what it does, then I think this is still a very, very nice fragrance. And you know, when I first got this, I initially did not have my sample of the blonde amber, so I didn't really know how to necessarily judge this fragrance other than just, you know, my raw experience that I had with it when I first sprayed it. And I could for sure say that when I sprayed this on, to me anyway, it didn't necessarily smell like a cheap fragrance or anything like that. Like I actually enjoyed wearing this fragrance the couple of times that I've worn it, especially before I got blonde amber. Now, once I got blonde amber and I sprayed blonde amber side by side with the Faris Al Arab, then it was like, okay, now I'm starting to notice things that I didn't necessarily, I guess, notice within this fragrance, that I could absolutely tell that this is, you know, the cheaper fragrance for sure. So, you know, again, I think for most people, especially if you're somebody who regularly buys, you know, inspired fragrances from like these inspired fragrance houses, and you typically don't sample the original fragrance, or, you know, you just don't really have access to being able to smell the original fragrance, then again, I think this is still a very, very fine choice. Now, I will have to get my hands on the Latafa version. I believe it's the Art of Arabia 3, I believe. That one, from what I've seen, is supposed to be like a blonde amber interpretation as well. I'll have to see, you know, how that one compares to this. And, you know, obviously to the blonde amber as well. But yeah, man, I would say definitely for probably like the first 20 to 30 minutes or so, this is going to smell like the much cheaper fragrance compared to blonde amber. And then, you know, I would say after that, it goes from smelling like a much cheaper fragrance to just a cheaper fragrance, you know. So again, it's not anything terrible. You can just tell that there is a considerable, you know, sort of quality difference between the two fragrances is what I get from it. I've seen some people kind of, you know, consider this like a 1-to-1 to the blonde amber. I can't say that I agree with that. You know, to my nose, I definitely do pick up on some noticeable differences, you know, between this and blonde amber. But again, this is still a very, very solid choice. I just think, you know, if you don't necessarily like those slightly more resinous, more kind of balsamic elements of blonde amber, then maybe this one might actually be the better, you know, scent for you. But I mean, at least for me, like when I sprayed this and I wore it, I was like, okay, like I can see the hype for this fragrance. I still don't think that this is worth $600, so I'll never buy a full bottle of the fragrance. But I can definitely understand the appeal of this particular scent profile, you know, and specifically this scent, the blonde amber. But you know, again, I think for most people who a $600 fragrance is like totally out of the question. I think for you, you know, you are still going to get a pretty decent, you know, serviceable interpretation of the scent profile. Now, for the performance on this, the performance is actually pretty decent. I would say Blonde Amber does, you know, project and last a little bit longer than what the Faris Al Arab does, but this is still a very solid performing fragrance. So longevity wise, this easily lasts on me well past 8 hours. It's definitely one that, like, for me, it doesn't necessarily have like the greatest projection, but it is something that definitely lingers on me for a really long time. So like I said, this definitely lasted well past 8 hours for sure. The projection, I would say, is just not as good as what it is in Blonde Amber, but you are still going to get, I would say, a little bit under like an arm's length or so of projection for like the first probably hour and a half, 2 hours or so. And then it does dial back. But overall, this does seem to be like a more kind of closer to your skin scent, at least on me anyway, the Faris Al Arab. Now for the actual closeness rating on Faris Al Arab, to me, I would say this is probably like overall maybe about 75 to 80% Blonde Amber. So again, like not like the most terrible interpretation of the scent. Does smell very good for, you know, the price that you pay for this. But this, I would say, is not necessarily, it's not as close to the original as what the Muharib is what I would say for sure. There are definitely some, I would say, much more noticeable differences between this and the original. All right. Now, if I'm just going to give this fragrance just an overall rating, right? This, I would say, is also like an 8 out of 10 for me. So like I said, when I wore this before I even got my, you know, nose on the original Blonde Amber, I was actually really liking this fragrance in the way that this smells. So this is still going to be one that I would absolutely recommend. I would just say that if you're looking for this to be like a 1-to-1 to, you know, Blonde Amber, or for this to be like a complete replacement for that fragrance, I don't think that that's what this is. You know, this is definitely just a cheap alternative to that fragrance that I do still think will, you know, definitely get you compliments for sure. You know, especially if you wear it in, you know, the right occasions, the right sort of, you know, settings. I would say also if you have the right clothing on. Overall, the scent profile to me is, it's not like, at least in my opinion, it's not the most casual scent to wear. So, you know, I would say do with that information what you may, but to me, this does smell like a slightly more kind of upper scale type of warm, you know, fall, winter time type of scent for sure. But yeah, man, I do still think that this is still a very recommendable sort of scent, especially for someone who is on a tighter budget. And, you know, again, a $600 fragrance is just completely out of the question for you. All right. So that is my take on both Faris Al Arab as well as Muharib from Maison Asrar. Definitely let me know in the comments what you all think about these two fragrances. Have you all gotten your nose on these two? If so, have you all also smelled these side by side with the original fragrances? And what do you all think, man? Do you all agree with my assessment of, you know, how close or unclose these may be to the original fragrances? All right. Definitely let me know in the comments. Also, I'll definitely have links in the description to where you can pick these up from Joma's shop. And also, if you're brand new to the channel, do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe. And again, that's Jamar from Vegas Scents. I'll see you all in the next video.